everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're really getting into NTPC Green Energy. They're making waves in the Indian renewable energy scene. And with their IPO coming up, well, let's just say we've got a lot to unpack. By the end of this, you'll have a much better sense of whether this is an investment you want to explore further.
It's a fascinating company, that's for sure. I mean, you can't talk about renewable energy in India without talking about NTPC Green Energy. They're already the largest public sector enterprise in terms of, well, capacity and generation. At least if you don't count hydro, that is.
Okay, so they're the big players, but what's in their portfolio? Is it all solar, wind? What's the mix like?
They've actually got a pretty diverse portfolio, which is always a good thing. We're talking solar and wind projects, and not just in one place. They're spread across 6 different states in India. It's all about that geographic diversity, right? Helps mitigate some of that risk.
Makes sense. Spread those bets. So who are they targeting with all this green energy? What's their game plan?
They're all about those large-scale partnerships. You know, the public sector undertakings, the major Indian corporations. Think about the kind of players who need massive amounts of reliable, renewable energy. That's their market.
And I'm guessing that's where those 15 off-takers for their 37 solar and 9 wind projects come in. Having those guaranteed buyers must be a big relief for potential investors, right?
You hit the nail on the head. Having those secured off-takers really reduces the risk for investors.
Yep.
It shows there's a real demand for the energy they're producing. But, you know, we can't just talk about off-takers. Let's dive into those financials a bit.
Right, the numbers. Let's talk about this IPO. What are we looking at?
Well, they're aiming for a fresh issue size of INR 10,000 crores. But here's the kicker. There's no offer for sale component.
Hold on, break that down for me. What does that mean for someone who might want to invest?
Basically, they're saying growth is the name of the game. All the money raised is going straight back into the company, not to existing shareholders. It's a clear signal they're in expansion mode.
Sounds ambitious, but how have they actually been doing financially? Should investors be excited?
Well, their revenue from FY 2023 to FY 2024, it jumped significantly. We're talking a massive increase, really. And their profit margins compared to some of their competitors are looking pretty healthy. However, and this is important for investors to know, we've only got data for 3 periods. It's not a lot to go off of.
So proceed with cautious optimism.
Exactly. Lots to be optimistic about. But limited data means a closer look is always a good idea.
That's fair. So they're major players, we get it. But how do they actually compare to other companies in this market? You've been looking at Adani Green Energy and Renew Power, right?
Yeah, and when you put their key metrics side by side, things like PE ratio, EPS, RONW, which is return on net worth, by the way, NAV or net asset value, and of course revenue, it paints an interesting picture.
I noticed NTPC Green Energy's PE ratio isn't available. Can you explain why that is and what it means?
It all comes down to the IPO price, which we still don't know. The PE ratio, or price to earnings ratio, tells you how much investors are willing to pay for every rupee of a company's earnings. No IPO price, no calculation. It's a big piece of the puzzle that's missing.
So we've got this company with a good track record, big plans.
Yep.
But we need that IPO price to really see if they're worth the hype. Speaking of hype, this gray market premium keeps popping up. What is that exactly?
It's basically a fancy way of saying unofficial speculative trading before an IPO. Think of it like a sneak peek, but completely unregulated, and it doesn't always reflect reality.
Okay, so unofficially, we're seeing reports of this gray market premium, or GMP, at INR 34 per share for NTPC Green Energy. Does that tell us anything useful?
It might suggest there's a good amount of interest from investors, but remember, it's just one data point and not necessarily reliable. GMP can be affected by all sorts of things that have nothing to do with the company's actual performance.
So take it with a grain of salt.
A whole teaspoon, maybe.
Yeah.
Don't make any decisions based on GMP alone. Look at the official IPO price when it's released, examine the financials, and really understand their place in the market.
So much to think about. They seem to have a strong position, the financials seem promising, but that IPO price remains the big question mark. And then there's the question of how broader trends might influence them.
Absolutely. India's focus on renewable energy is only going to get stronger, which could mean huge opportunities for a company like this. But the question is, how will government policies and incentives actually impact their growth? And ultimately, your returns as an investor?
That is the million-dollar question, and one that we'll dig into right after this. So we were just talking about how government policies could really make or break NTPC Green Energy's future. What kind of policies are we talking about, and how could they impact things?
Well, India has set some seriously ambitious targets for renewable energy, right? I mean, they're aiming for 500 gigawatts of capacity by 2030. 500. That's huge. And to hit that target, they're putting their money where their mouth is. We're talking tax breaks for renewable energy producers, incentives for investment in the sector. These moves, they could be a major boost for a company like NTPC.
A rising tide lifts all boats, as they say. Or in this case, a rising tide of government support lifts those already leading the charge.
Exactly. And let's not forget about what's happening globally, too. Sustainable investing is gaining traction. Investors are realizing that considering ESG factors, environmental, social, and governance, it's not just good for the planet, it can be good for their portfolios.
So NTPC Green Energy benefits from domestic policies and this global shift towards sustainability. Two birds, one stone.
Potentially, yeah. But it's not all smooth sailing. They've still got challenges to navigate. Think grid infrastructure limitations, competition in the renewable energy space. It's not a cakewalk. Never is it? Especially with investing. Speaking of competition, how does NTPC stack up to its peers, especially when it comes to those profit margins we were talking about?
Well, we don't have years of data to look at, but their profit margins right now, they're looking pretty good, especially compared to Adani, Green Energy, and Renew Power. Nothing drastically different, but they're definitely competitive.
That's good to hear. But what about down the line? Are there any big tech advancements coming that could give NTPC an advantage?
Now there's the million-dollar question. Think about it. Advancements in solar technology, things like higher efficiency panels or those new battery storage solutions, that could change everything. Profitability, India's energy transition, everything. Keeping an eye on tech is key. It could be a game changer, not just for them, but the entire sector.
Trying to predict the future of tech is always interesting and a little nerve-wracking. I guess that's part of what makes investing in renewables so exciting.
You got it. It's got the potential for huge rewards, but there's always risk, too. Which is why it's always a good idea to do your research, figure out your risk tolerance, maybe even have a chat with a financial advisor before going all in.
Couldn't agree more. We've given you a lot of information, but at the end of the day, it's your money, your future. It's up to you to decide if this investment makes sense for your goals.
Like we always say, knowledge is power. And that's especially true when you're investing your hard-earned cash.
Absolutely. And speaking of knowledge, before we wrap this up, there's one more thing I want to touch on.
Oh, don't leave us hanging.
We've covered the numbers, the market trends, all super important, but there's the human side of this too.
What do you mean?
Well, NTPC Green Energy isn't an island. They're part of the bigger NTPC Limited group, right?
Yeah.
And that group.
Right.
They've got a long history in the Indian power sector. That experience, that infrastructure, it could give them a serious leg up as they navigate this whole renewable energy landscape.
So they're not starting from zero. They've got that legacy, that deep well of experience to draw on.
Exactly. So yeah, look at the data, for sure. But don't forget those less tangible factors, their history, their leadership, their whole philosophy around going green.
It's easy to get lost in the numbers, but sometimes those less obvious factors, they can be the difference makers.
100%. It's about seeing the full picture, getting their story, and then asking yourself, does this story resonate with me as an investor?
I like that. Finding those investments that really jive with your values, your vision for the future. It's more than just making money, it's being a part of something bigger.
Now you're talking my language.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive on NTPC Green Energy and their upcoming IPO. We've covered a lot, their market position, those financials, those all-important government policies, the future of the tech, even the human element. We really went there.
We just scratched the surface, really. There's always more to discover, more to explore. But hopefully, this gives you a starting point as you continue your research.
And remember, any investment, do your homework, know your risk tolerance, and hey, maybe chat with a financial advisor before making any big moves.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's your money, your future, your call. We're just here to give you the info you need to make those decisions confidently.
That's what we're here for. So as always, huge thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll be back soon with another interesting company, another chance to learn something new, and keep building that financial know-how. Until then, happy investing. You know what they say, knowledge is power, especially when it comes to putting your money on the line.
Couldn't agree more. And speaking of knowledge, before we wrap things up here, there's one more thing I think we should touch on.
Oh, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So we've talked numbers, we've talked trends, all that good stuff. But there's another piece of the puzzle, the human element.
What do you mean by that?
Well, NTPC Green Energy, they're not an island.
Yeah.
They're part of something bigger, the NTPC Limited Group. And that group, they've got history, decades of experience in the Indian power sector. I think that gives them a real edge, that existing infrastructure, as they navigate this renewable energy world.
Right, so it's not like they're starting from scratch. They've got that legacy, that experience to lean on.
Exactly. So look at the data, absolutely. But don't discount those less tangible factors. Company history, leadership, their whole philosophy around this green transition.
It's easy to get stuck on the numbers, but sometimes those less, shall we say, quantifiable factors, they can make all the difference.
Totally agree. It's about getting the full picture, understanding the company's story. And then it comes down to you, does this story resonate with me as an investor?
I love that. Finding those investments that really align with your values, your vision for the future. It's not just about the money, it's about being part of something bigger, something meaningful.
Now you're speaking my language.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into NTPC Green Energy and their big IPO. We've covered a ton, their position in the market, those financials, those government policies we can't ignore, what's coming down the pipeline with technology. We even got philosophical with the human element.
Honestly, we've only scratched the surface. There's always more to learn, more angles to explore, but hopefully this gives you a good foundation to build on as you do your own research.
And remember, everyone, any investment, anytime, do your homework, be honest with yourself about your risk tolerance. And hey, maybe a quick chat with a financial advisor never hurt anyone.
Here. It's your money, your future. Ultimately, the decision is yours. We're just here to give you the information you need so you can make those decisions with confidence.
Exactly. So as always, thank you so much for joining us for another deep dive. We'll be back again soon with another fascinating company, another chance to learn something new and keep building that financial knowledge. Until then, happy investing, everyone.